August 19, 1942. Nearly 5,000 men of the Canadian 2nd Division land on the shingle at Dieppe, convinced they are opening the road to Europe. By noon, over two-thirds are dead, wounded, or captured, the highest single-day loss in Canadian military history. A raid meant to test German defenses instead exposes every fatal mistake in Allied planning. What went so catastrophically wrong in just 6 hours, and why did such a disaster become the blueprint for victory at D-Day? By the summer of 1942, Allied leaders faced mounting pressure from all sides. The Soviet Union, locked in a brutal struggle on the Eastern Front, demanded immediate action, a second front in Western Europe to pull German divisions away from Stalingrad and Leningrad. In London, Winston Churchill weighed the political cost of delay. Britain needed to prove its forces could strike back, not just defend. The War Cabinet debated options, searching for an operation bold enough to reassure Stalin and limited enough to avoid another disaster like Dunkirk. The answer arrived in the form of a raid. Not a full-scale invasion, but a reconnaissance in force. The idea was simple on paper and dangerous in practice. Hit a German-held port, gather intelligence, test new tactics, and withdraw before the enemy could counterattack. Dieppe, a seaside town in northern France, became the target. On paper, it looked achievable. The operation would show the Allies were serious about taking the fight to Hitler without the risks of a full invasion. Canadian troops, eager for combat after years of waiting in England, formed the backbone of the assault. Political calculations drove the timetable as much as military logic. The raid's official label, reconnaissance in force, masked the true gamble. Every decision, from the choice of target to the speed of planning, reflected the urgency to act, to satisfy allies, and to prove that the Western powers could strike at the heart of occupied Europe. The price of haste would soon become clear. The Canadian 2nd Division had waited over 2 years in England, training, drilling, and watching other units go into action. By August 1942, their chance had arrived. Nearly 5,000 men, organized into 6 infantry brigades, formed the core of the Dieppe assault. They were joined by British commandos, a handful of American Rangers, and a new weapon for the beaches, 58 Churchill tanks, painted for battle and loaded onto landing craft. The tanks, heavy and untested in real combat, were meant to be the hammer that broke through German lines. Morale ran high on the eve of the raid. Letters home spoke of pride and nerves, but also relief. At last, a real fight. In the darkness before dawn, Padre John Foote moved quietly among the ranks of the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. He offered a prayer for the men, then stayed with them as they boarded their landing craft. Foote was not armed. His duty was to comfort the wounded, to carry stretchers, and to remind the men they were not alone, no matter what happened on the beach. The assault force believed their training and numbers would carry the day. What they could not see from the decks was the true nature of the ground ahead, the stones, the sea wall, and the hidden guns. The planners had missed 3 critical details that would decide the fate of nearly every man now crossing the channel. The main beach at Dieppe looked deceptively simple from the air, wide, flat, and open to the sea. In reality, the ground was a trap. Instead of sand, the landing zone was covered in chert stones, egg-sized, razor-edged pebbles that shifted under every step. Infantrymen sank ankle-deep, boots slipping and sliding, unable to run or even crouch safely. They were unable to maneuver under fire. For tanks, the shingle was worse. Tracks churned the stones into loose pits, bogging down the heavy Churchill tanks before they reached the seawall. Those tanks became stationary targets, unable to support the infantry. The wall itself loomed 12 foot high, a solid concrete barrier topped with barbed wire. Engineers were supposed to blast gaps, but the open beach left them exposed before they could set charges. The assaulting units were exposed long before they reached cover. Beyond the seawall, German defences were hidden in plain sight. Pillboxes and machine gun nests were dug into the cliffs, but the real killers were the 88mm guns concealed in caves at each end of the bay. Those guns had a clear field of fire across the beach, turning the landing zone into a killing ground from the first moment. The physical environment at Dieppe offered no cover, no escape, and no margin for error. The terrain itself was part of the defense, and it made retreat as deadly as the advance. At 4:50 in the morning, a German patrol boat spotted the approaching Allied fleet. The alarm swept along the coast, erasing any hope of surprise. By 5:20, the first wave of Canadian infantry hit the Dieppe beach. Searchlights cut through the darkness. Machine guns opened up from pillboxes and cliff-top caves. The men tried to run, but found themselves trapped in the chert stones, ankle-deep and unable to move quickly, exposed to fire from every angle. The seawall loomed just yards ahead, but the open ground offered no protection. Tanks were supposed to break the deadlock. At 7 o'clock, 29 Churchill tanks rumbled onto the beach, their tracks immediately churning the loose stones into pits. Some managed to cross the lower sections of the seawall, but most bogged down before reaching it. Engineers sent to blast openings were killed almost as soon as they landed. The tanks became stranded, unable to move forward or retreat, and they drew concentrated fire from German 88mm guns hidden in the cliffs. One by one they were knocked out or abandoned. Not a single tank reached the town. The infantry, pinned behind the seawall, watched their last hope for cover and momentum burn on the stones. Hopelessness set in as the minutes ticked by and casualties mounted. The plan unraveled in real time. On Blue Beach, the Royal Regiment of Canada suffered nearly total destruction. Of the 554 men who landed, only 11 made it back to England. The rest were killed or taken prisoner, their advance stopped cold by machine gun fire and the unyielding seawall. Survivors later described men falling in rows, the stones beneath them slick with blood. The Fusiliers Mont Royal faced a similar fate, 513 casualties out of 584 who landed, most cut down within minutes of reaching the shore. The Essex Scottish managed to push just 100 yards before barbed wire and bullets halted every step forward. There was no shelter, no way to regroup. By 9 a.m., the order to withdraw reached the beaches. Landing craft returned under relentless fire, many destroyed before they could reach the stranded men. Some soldiers tried to swim for the boats, only to be shot in the water. Amid the chaos, No. 4 Commando managed to pull out after destroying their target, while No. 3 Commando was pinned down and suffered heavy losses. At Dieppe, withdrawal meant leaving the wounded behind. By 11 a.m., the fighting was over. The beaches were silent, covered with the dead and the dying, the German defences still intact. The Dieppe raid left behind a ledger of loss that stretched far beyond the battered Canadian infantry. The Royal Air Force lost 106 aircraft in a single morning, more than double the number downed by the Luftwaffe, which recorded 48 losses. 64 Allied pilots never returned. On the water, the Royal Navy paid heavily as well. One destroyer, HMS Berkeley, was sunk after being crippled by bombs, and 33 landing craft were destroyed or abandoned along the shore. Over 500 sailors and marines were counted as dead or wounded by noon. The hard arithmetic of the operation was unblinking. No port was captured, no vital intelligence was brought home, no German positions were overrun. The beaches remained in enemy hands, their defences untouched. Every aircraft, ship, and man lost at Dieppe brought nothing in return except a catalogue of failure and the urgent need to rethink how an invasion of Europe could ever succeed. From the carnage on Dieppe's beaches, Allied planners extracted 6 hard lessons that reshaped every major amphibious operation to follow. First, never assault a fortified port head-on. For D-Day, the Allies chose artificial Mulberry harbours instead of trying to seize a town under fire. Second, overwhelming preliminary bombardment became non-negotiable. Normandy's landings began with hours of naval and air attacks, unlike Dieppe's silence. Third, tanks alone were not enough. Dieppe's bogged-down Churchill tanks drove the development of specialized vehicles, including flail tanks for mines, bridge layers for obstacles, and flame tanks for bunkers. Fourth, naval gunfire had to be both massive and precise, able to reach gun emplacements high on cliffs. Fifth, air superiority was essential. Over 11,000 Allied aircraft would blanket the skies on D-Day, a scale unimaginable at Dieppe. Sixth, reconnaissance had to be exhaustive. Normandy's sandy beaches were chosen only after intensive study, avoiding the chert stones that trapped so many Canadians. Amid the disaster, acts of leadership and courage still stood out. Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Merritt, commanding the South Saskatchewan Regiment, led his men across a narrow bridge under machine gun fire, returning again and again to rally stragglers. Wounded and captured, he received the Victoria Cross for refusing to leave anyone behind. Today, Dieppe's shingle is scattered with Canadian memorials. The names of the 916 dead are etched in stone, facing the same bunkers that ended their lives. Lord Mountbatten, the architect of the raid, later claimed, "For every man who died at Dieppe, 10 were spared at Normandy." The arithmetic is simple. Whether the price was necessary or simply too high remains an open wound. Every plan written since Dieppe weighs the risk of failure against the cost in lives. Tactical progress is paid for in human currency, lessons inked in blood on foreign stones. Today, the question isn't just what we've learned, but what we're still willing to risk to learn it.